The following podcast is brought to you by iSelect Fund. iSelect is dedicated to helping investors create a diversified portfolio of venture investments through their financial advisors. Learn how to start your own venture portfolio today by visiting iselectfund.com. Welcome to the Innovation Anarchy podcast. Each week we bring you ideas on investing, innovation, technology, and entrepreneurship. This week we discuss innovation in agriculture, plant biology, data analytics, and cloud computing.
This is Carter Williams with iSelect. Today we have Benson Hill. As a way of background, the global population is booming, diets are shifting, and urbanization is rising. Never has so much been asked of agriculture to meet the needs of our society. Never have the external risks to agriculture advancement been greater, whether from changing climate, limited natural resources, concerns over chemical inputs, protests over GMO, industry consolidation, or reduced choice in the marketplace. New innovation and new innovators are needed to advance agriculture for people and our planet. The emergence era of cloud biology, the combination of plant biology, big data, analytics, and cloud computing will enable innovation in agriculture throughout the value chain. Company today, Benson Hill, a portfolio company of iSelect, is pioneering the use of cloud biology and delivering on its promise to solve some of the world's greatest agricultural challenges. And today we have Matt Crisp, CEO of Benson Hill. Matt?
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. Matt, you and I talk a lot about what's going on with Benson Hill, but can you just give us a rundown of what Benson Hill does?
Sure. So as you stated, Carter, we're working in a really rapidly emerging field called cloud biology, which isn't new. This is something that has existed in the broader life sciences community now for several years. And there's a couple emerging examples of cloud bio in the industrial biosciences arena as well. But it's this convergence of cloud computing with
sort of Amazon and all that sort of
exactly,
stuff.
AWS and what that really represents, both from an analytics perspective, as computational scale storage perspective, that transcends many industries, obviously not just the life sciences, including agriculture. But when you take that and you combine it with analytics, and when I say analytics, we're talking about ML and machine learning, artificial intelligence driven approaches to autonomous learning and how to take oftentimes very large data sets and extract value that humans might not be able to extract value from, and then in turn learn from and develop effectively a cognitive engine that can provide biological solutions or recommendations for outputs. And that's really where the third leg of that stool comes in, and that's biology. Obviously, that's plant biology in agriculture.
In the end, you're sort of exhibiting these traits into seed that somebody can plant.
Exactly. So a product at Benson Hill, people say, okay, so tell me, what is a cloud biology product? And the product is the manifestation of what a computational engine is informing you to do. It's in the crop, and sometimes that is higher productivity. Sometimes it's better nutritional profiles. Sometimes it's a different leaf architecture so that you can plant at a higher density in a field and get effectively more outputs for no additional inputs. So the end user, whether that be the farmer who just wants to be more productive, more profitable, more sustainable, whether that's the consumer who wants a different grain profile or nutritional content in the food that they consume, whether maybe it's an energy company that wants more sugar in their cane crop, which is all for ethanol. We have partnerships and are working with organizations that are a part of all of those value chains.
So my experience with seed is going to the hardware store and buying a seed and planting something in the garden. Let's roll the clock back 100 years ago, when farmers were growing a crop of corn and planting it. And frankly, for 400,000 years, we've been doing some level of agriculture. what did 100 years ago? What did somebody do to improve seed? They didn't have AWS to do that. What did they do? And
Right.
what's your box in a sense doing that they did but faster?
Well, breeding for thousands of years has been the primary modality to improve crops.
So
And
that's splicing
well, it's
different
not
kind of crops
not
together.
even it's sexual combination. It's taking one plant and putting its pollen with another plant, and the result of those two genotypes being combined with another is better than, say, the male or the female that were there. And there's something called trait integration. So you're effectively looking for a trait of a characteristic, say, of one plant, and you want to put that in another plant. So you would cross that in, and then you might back cross that plant, that recipient germplasm over and over again, selecting for the trait that came from the donor. This is common practice, right? This was a foundation of how to improve crops since agriculture was started. And in the last 30 years of these, like you were saying, splicing, and the ability to go in and make more manual or directed genetic changes, has really changed the game of agriculture, as much from a business perspective as it has from a technical and scientific perspective. So when we saw a handful of companies begin to innovate in genomics and begin to develop novel products that really began to change behavior and change outputs at the farm level, those organizations obtained a significant strategic advantage. And as a result, began consolidating that industry over time. And from 1996 until 2006, you went from literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of seed companies to a dozen, a couple dozen, few dozen. But if you were to look at in the last 10 years where 80% of the total research spending in agriculture globally occurs, it's under the roof of 5 companies.
Huh. And is that it takes that much scale to be able to do it, or did they just become so market dominant that they pushed everybody else out?
I'd say it's both. I mean, this was really, really sophisticated technology in the 1980s and 90s. To be able to take a gene from another organism and get it to integrate into the genome of a plant was, it took a lot of really smart people to figure that out, and a lot of money and a lot of time, a lot of patience. So that I think the scale that was required to accomplish those goals can't be underestimated. But they were able to tackle those goals and to succeed, and in time develop Gen 2 and Gen 3 and Gen however many of products that stacked on top of that, in a way, again, that made the distance between them from an innovation perspective and everybody else farther and farther and farther. And that made, in turn, I think this industry dominance factor something that was, I won't say logical because it took a lot of foresight for the leadership of those companies at that time, but it set them on a track to obtain market dominance, which is, you and I have talked about, it's a very logical progression. This isn't unique to agriculture. Maybe the degree of consolidation in agriculture is a little bit unique right now, especially given where we are and will be in the next 2 years, assuming that some of the additional consolidation occurs. But it isn't unusual.
So as an investor, I'm trained from school to look at how these patterns change. And we've gone through an evolution that I would say is in this industry where everyone is out farming and breeding plants in different ways, and you have all these people, a whole bunch of different companies out there doing that work. Monsanto and a few sort of came in and Monsanto used to be a chemical company, and they really sort of made a very significant pivot with Roundup and then follow-on to really vertically integrate and really drive some change using genomics. to, over the last 30 years, to really vertically integrate and really drive a lot of change, because organizationally it just takes a lot of effort to pull that off, and you got to sort of have your team all within your four walls. The very common pattern. But on September 14th, Monsanto and Bayer announced the merger of what they're doing. And our perception is there's yet another change. And so while that merger is going on, stepping back, there was a process of breeding, and then there's the process of genomics. And now there's a new process and technology coming on with gene editing. Can you delve in a little bit more with what's going on with gene editing?
Sure. Genome editing has been around for more than a decade. And if you had to summarize it very, very briefly or simply, you would say that it's the ability to even more precisely go into a genome and make a change. And that could be a single base pair change. It could be putting a gene in a very specific location. It could be swapping out or silencing a gene or a part of a gene. And so it allows us a more refined, more predictable model of how to innovate less expensively, more expeditiously. And so as you can imagine, it contrasts to the paradigm under which the few companies that exist gained their market dominance. They gained market dominance because, again, they had scale. They're immensely profitable organizations that succeeded in business and plowed a substantial portion of their rewards back into R&D. And that, in turn, grew rapidly. Genome editing represents one tool, like cloud computing. I think they're in many respects very similar through the lens of an innovator in the space, by lowering the barriers, by taking a technology and approach that 10 or 15 years ago could have taken 5 to 10 years and minimum of 10, 20, $30 million, and allowing you to do that in 2 or 3 years for 1/10 or 1/100th of the cost. We're not talking, incremental improvement. We're talking exponential changes that we believe, and we're positioning our company to take advantage of this, but we believe that what that does is it provides a model to empower innovation to a much more diverse community of stakeholders. Stakeholders that are new to this category entirely, and stakeholders that exist throughout the value chain, all the way to the consumer. Your seed companies operate at one place in the value chain, and their customer really has been the farmer. They're making a genomic improvement. They're monetizing that at the grower level, and that's been a extraordinarily successful business. They, over time, in recent years, have realized, I think, that their consumer, the consumer is becoming a bigger part of food and ag. It's becoming a bigger part of all.
This is consumers who want different nutrition, or they don't want it
Right.
to be GMO, or they
exactly, and
they want to make sure it doesn't use as much water when you make the crop.
exactly.
There's a whole bunch
There
of different
are
requirements.
sustainability considerations. There are control considerations.
What do you mean by control?
Well, when you've taken an industry like ours, and it from outsider looking in, and you're saying, wait a minute, so 5 companies control, the seeds. They control a huge proportion of what we consume.
And they sort of needed to do that to get through that first chunk.
I think that
They had to
it's
control
fair.
all the inputs.
I think it's fair not to say so much that they had to control all the inputs, but that they had to build bigger businesses in order to be able to innovate. And look, if you were in a position where you needed to create shareholder value and build a successful company, there are a lot of decisions that are made that are very congruent with those interests. They're very aligned, but that we're living in a world now where there's a lot higher expectation of transparency, and the consumer's controlling that conversation. The consumer is aware of what they're more aware than ever, especially in the developed world, of what they're eating, where it came from, sometimes who grew it, what if it's meat, what the cow was fed. This isn't going to undo itself. Our millennial generation and the following generation aren't going to wake up one day and go, oh, it's okay, we'll just trust that this is all well and good. They want to know, or they want to know that they can know if they wanted to. And again, that's providing, I think, a catalyst for a lot of companies that are in the space today, and a lot of companies and investors, for instance, that are looking at ag as a category to potentially be a part of. It's forcing the conversation of how do we work around that model? How do we integrate a level of transparency in our product development efforts, in our commercialization, marketing, R&D that satisfies the ultimate customer in a way that really hasn't been done very well to date.
So again, going back a bit to the analogy here of vertical versus horizontal integration. So there was a period where Monsanto was really, let's say, driving yield, and let's increase yield 5, 10, 15%, and we've sort of done that. And what I hear you saying is consumers are saying now, whether that consumer is a farmer or someone who's eating the food or someone who's making the food in between, we want improved yield, because worldwide population over the next 20 years is expected to grow by 2 billion. So we need more food, more yield. But also, we want better nutritional value. As the rest of the world gets more wealthy, it stops just eating rice and wants to eat beef, and beef needs to be fed. So you need more of that. So that they're looking for more yield, they're looking for more nutritional value, and then as constraints on resources continue to burden, they need it more resource efficient. So at the same time, we've got massive innovation coming on where you're taking a process that used to cost a lot of money to do, and through using cloud computing, shortening the development time and decreasing the cost of everything that's going on.
Right. I mean, you're talking about a mashup effectively of technologies, and like you're alluding to, cloud computing is an enabler, but it allows us to run predictive analytics. Data and the analytics, provide a recommendation, and that recommendation is targeted towards, like you're saying, it could be crop productivity. Now, there's a difference though, and it's really driven by the customer. So when I say consumer, I mean more so the moms in the grocery store. The consumer, or I'll rephrase that part and say customer of a seed company, continues in many respects to be a farmer. And a farmer wants more output without having to add input. That's a monetizable product. If I can take a yield gene and I can increase the ability of a corn plant to make grain, I will monetize that at the farm gate, or from the farmer, but based on what it creates for him or her at the farm gate. When I move down that value chain, when I get more vertical from a genomics innovation perspective, I can have a conversation with somebody, let's say a food company. Go to a PepsiCo, good example. Pepsi knows, obviously, that as one of the largest snack food producers in the world, agriculture is a pretty strategic, it's a strategic area for them. And we think of PepsiCo and we think of, soda and snacks, and we, from a business perspective, might think marketing, which in many respects it is, packaging. But behind that, they're having to source material, and they want to make sure that they're getting consistent quality material that meets their product spec. So they have their own breeding program in potato, for instance. They have their own corn germplasm for Frito-Lay, right? So things like chips and corn chips and potato chips, they're not.
And is that a yield thing or a taste thing, or is
Both.
it all the above?
Texture, taste, yield. I mean, I'd say that in many respects, the food company tends to be less concentrated on yield and more concentrated on quality and consistency of supply.
So can you design a seed that makes the Pepsi potatoes meet their requirements and do that in a deterministic way?
Oftentimes,
sit in a room and say, "Oh yeah, we'll go back to the lab and we'll produce this."
That's exactly right. And what you're doing is you're saying not so much that you're designing it in a bottoms up in a de novo way, but what you're doing is using maybe the chassis that they already have. This potato has a certain starch profile. It can be processed in a certain way, and it makes the best tasting potato chip that Pepsi's ever made. But they'd like to make it with a slightly different starch profile. Maybe it's a different nutritional characteristic that they would like to add, right, to the potato.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they'd like to reduce crop loss and find a way to make it blight resistant, such that it doesn't have disease that compromises its supply.
Because they want to grow it in some particular area
Could
of the world.
be, yeah.
They,
But disease happens. I mean,
Yes.
These things are susceptible to all kinds of environmental factors, and so to the extent that they're looking for consistency in supply, and disease compromises that, they might say, "I'd really like you to add this disease resistance gene to my potato, but I don't know where it is. I don't know how to find it. I need to go find it." So you endeavor you're endeavoring to discover effectively a gene or gene combination that would impart that characteristic, just like you would if you wanted to change the starch profile.
and that's what you do, and to a degree.
To a degree, because what we're doing is we're agnostic to the crop. We're agnostic to the target. So whether it's nutritional profile or photosynthetic efficiency or leaf architecture, we're agnostic. What we're about is getting data into a place and coupled with analytics at a scale where one can derive informed guidelines that will allow them to most efficiently develop a product. And so I'll give you an example. We were talking to a food company a couple weeks ago, and an unnamed food company doesn't want any GMO. And this is pretty common. As a brand, a lot of brands are positioning themselves as non-GMO, and I think the jury's out on whether that's going to be a monetizable, whether people really pay for that or not. In some cases, they're already non-GMO, and they're just catching some marketing appeal.
credit,
Yeah,
yep.
it's all marketing appeal. But said company tells me, I don't want any GMO, but I'm open-minded to genome editing. Okay, let's talk about that. What are the targets you need? What do you want out of your crop? And we can sit down and look at data, their data, our data, public data, and begin to understand using the parameters that they've given us. I don't want to use something that's going to be a regulated article. I don't want to use a GMO-based approach. I am completely open to using a breeding approach and natural variation, and I might be willing to use a genome editing approach. So let's sit down and look at product spec that they have and how to get most quickly from point A to point B. Where are we right now? What is the state of your genetic material? What gene or genes are we going to go have to find, or maybe they already know what they are, who knows? And how do we then employ a research and development approach that gets us to a product as fast as possible with the best outcome? And that's a powerful approach when you consider that we have only, just barely scraped the surface of the genetic potential, the global genetic potential of plants.
And where 100 years ago, you'd go through years and years and years of breeding, you can consolidate that
Right.
into a fraction of the time.
A fraction of the time. I mean, to give you an idea, you can, using computational driven approaches and whole genome sequencing today, cut your breeding cycles almost in half. Using genome editing, you can think about that being cut even further. And instead of saying, and this is the way we would have done it 50 years ago or 30 years ago, is I've got these 10 different lines and they all have 10 different characteristics I like. I need, over the course of however many generations of crossing and back crossing, to combine, I want all 10 of those characteristics combined into this product. With genome editing, if you know what you want to go after, if you know what you need to do, you can employ that technology in a single germplasm, in a single, in one material, make those changes, and you're done. I mean, you still need to. I don't mean to overstate the simplicity, but you still have to trial. You still have to go and make sure that your stuff checks out. You still have to put it in the field. It doesn't. You're not eating data for breakfast, as somebody says. But you still have to test it out. But you're right. You're dramatically reducing the cost to get from point A to point B, and you're increasing the confidence that when you get to point B, you're in fact going to have what you want.
So when I talk to growers, they're dealing. If I'm a row crop, I'm building I'm a farmer. I plant soy. I plant corn. I got huge price pressures on me. Business feels a little tough. It feels a little tough going forward for some time. And now I look sort of at the evolution of technology, and I went through the introduction of the PC. So in 1980, we saw this big shift where AT&T was broken up, and soon thereafter, things like Microsoft and Cisco and all those companies came online, and we know what those companies are today. But it feels like when I hear your story, I emotionally connect back to when I was a kid, and that shift went from the only person you can get your phone service from is AT&T. It costs 10 cents a minute, $1 a minute long distance. You got to rent the phone from them. It feels very much like the sort of way Monsanto operates this way, and had to get the market going. But now we're making a shift, and so that shift is, technically in strategy, that's called a horizontal shift. You help seed companies get better seed through your genomics platform, and Microsoft sort of stepped in and produced an operating system that then everybody, so that you sell Crop OS. It's a very similar sort of notional concept, but then Dell came into the business, and Hewlett-Packard came into the business, and NEC started building monitors, and all these other peripherals have emerged, and each one of them did something different. And if you do go to a farm today, and you'll find that people are flying drones, and they're trying data systems, and they've got new sensors, and so explain to me, or what's your sense of all these other things that are going to come online, and do they fit into your ecosystem? Do they compete? What's sort of the farm? How's the farm evolving with this?
Yeah, if I had to, there's a terrific amount of innovation going on in ag right now, across several different areas, some of which you just alluded to. In terms of what touches our ecosystem, I'd say that biology, the biology of the crop, is this common denominator throughout the value chain, and that's why when we think about partners and we think about a commercialization strategy, we don't stop at the grower. The grower is hugely important. I mean, growers in this country are the best growers in the world, and their success is something that we as a society have enjoyed, but that is going to get significantly better, more automated, more intelligent, more resource sensitive and efficient. But the biology, the crop still has to go in the ground. It still has to be harvested. And,
Yeah, you're building a seed that then goes in a piece of dirt and then grows.
Right.
So
Right. As Norman Borlaug said, there are no miracles in agriculture. Right? You still have to get the crop, and it might be all roboticized. In many
that'll
respects,
help
a lot of it
sort
is
the labor inputs.
Totally. But when we, again, back to our ecosystem, to the extent that something is interacting with the genetics of the plant, it's inside of the genome of the plant. And I think in time, fast forward 5, 10, 15 years, it's not just the genome of the plant, but it's the interaction of the other biological systems in that environment.
So we were invested in a probiotics company that's basically putting bacteria in into the ground to help grow grass better. I mean, do you envision that down the road that other probiotics companies will be working in conjunction with you to get these two? I needed a printer to hook up to my computer, and the cords needed to fit. Is there a similar analogy?
Yeah, I do. I love that analogy, and you're right. The context in which products in agriculture have been commercialized are largely singular. Ag companies want to get on an acre to get business to sell a portfolio of stuff. They want to sell the seed and the fertilizer and the biologics and some other treatment, and they want to be able to sell all of those things.
All one-stop shop.
Right, but they all, for all intents and purposes, have independent value propositions. 10, 20 years from now, that will not be the case. It will be a much more solution-directed sell. We will be looking at the genome of a plant and understanding how can we further boost photosynthetic efficiency and atmospheric carbon fixation and crop productivity and health and disease and resistance and all of the cadre of things that we might try to tackle using, say, either a crop genome-oriented approach or some chemistry or some biology. We will have designed on the front end products that interact favorably with the microbiome, that interact with other products that might not even independently be a viable product, but when combined with something that, say, as a genetic change in a crop plant, provides a synergistic effect and a more sustainable outcome. That will happen. That becomes remarkably complex. And that's not something that Benson Hill is doing today. We're focused on the crop and the genome of a plant, many different plants, but the genome within the harvested material. Anyway, I think it's important for us to realize how that ecosystem will evolve. And then on the other side, the adjacencies, the horizontal, as you put it, there are going to be all types of automation and understanding knowledge at the grower level, but throughout the entire value chain, from that provide transparency and a lot of what the consumers are demanding.
So again, sort of going back to this analogy, we paid 10 cents a minute in 1980, and then the day after it all started collapsed as everything opened up. And I think the first PC that I used cost $2,500 and had word processing, and that was it.
Right.
And now I can, for a fraction of that, do cloud computing on that,
right,
on that type of platform. And so it radically changed, and the costs all went down. And so does the analogy extend? We're sitting here saying, okay, we got 7.3 billion people now, and 2050 we're going to have 10 billion people in the world, and we're not going to have enough food, and we're going to use up all of our water, and the end of the world is going to occur, and there's no solution. But then we hear from farmers thinking that there's not a whole lot of chance to improve the economics of the farm.
Right.
Is that true?
Well,
or I don't know what I'm saying.
There's a lot of
which way is this going to go?
I was going to say there's a lot there. There's a lot of problems to be solved. I love I don't love, but the reality of the statistic that in the next 35 years we'll need to produce more food than we have in the last, or more agriculture productivity than we have in the last 10,000 years combined. It kind of puts it into perspective of the magnitude of what
Yes.
we are facing, and that there's only one thing that I think I can categorically agree on with my colleagues in this community, and that is that 3 companies aren't going to solve that problem.
Yes. I think that's, from an innovation standpoint,
Right.
that's the way it's been in the past.
Right.
You got to launch a lot of other companies.
And so to parallel your example with a $2,500 computer that has word processing, depending on who you ask, you hear stories about how 25 years ago, the first ag biotech trait product was commercialized, and it took 18 years and cost $200 million, right? We at Benson Hill, I know, and other people in this industry are developing regulated biotech trait products in a regulatory environment that's much more stringent than it was then, in 5 years, 6 years, for $15-20 million.
Huh.
And look, that's still a big nut. I mean, that's a lot of cash. Now you add genome editing to that, and you're going to talk about, even with appropriate validation, field work, et cetera, cutting that up to half of time, and maybe more than half of cost. Right? That's a big deal. That enables hundreds of companies to do what right now, 5, 10, 15 maybe can do. Or maybe it's overstating where we are today. 10 years ago, 5, 10 companies could have done.
And while my understanding is a lot of this focus in the past has been on the major row crops, that you're starting to see other crops come to you looking,
Absolutely. I'm glad you brought that up. That's a very, very important point, that of the 80% of research dollars globally that have been spent by 5 companies last year, or in the last, I think it's 5 years, we ran some analysis to try and untangle this, but I'm pretty confident in saying that more than 85% of that 80% is corn and soybeans.
Huh.
So there's a big universe out there of crops that haven't really gotten much attention. And again, that's not I want to be clear. That's very logical, because of the cost of innovation, because of the way that these things ultimately are monetized. It wouldn't make sense for companies to spend the same amount of money developing 20 different crops.
Yes.
On each crop. So you have to scale. You have to
Well, and
realize
this is
that opportunity.
akin to, we used to have mainframe computers. It took a lot to put them together.
Right.
Then we figured out how to make them a lot cheaper. They became PCs, and then you stuck a whole bunch of PCs together and built cloud computing, and
Right.
and we're off to the races.
Right. And now this iPhone here is more powerful than anything that
by
orders of magnitude.
Orders of magnitude
Right,
than the
right.
PC that when I was in high school we were using. And so in terms of the evolution going forward in our conversations, it feels like, this type of technology, breeding, GMO, gene editing to optimize nutrition yield, and resource efficiency, is going to grow linearly, exponentially.
I think the number of players involved is going to grow dramatically. We should see dozens of new entrants to the field in the genomics arena over the next several years. I think a lot of them will be focused on areas of research that one would consider low-hanging fruit. How much research do we know has been done on the gene editing side and barley on?
Yep.
You
Or
could
cotton
or quinoa. You
yeah.
could rattle off 30 different crops that have received virtually no substantive investment that are valuable in some respects to a consumer at a premium. So there's going to be a lot of scale that I think is realized across a community of innovators over the next several years. The number of targets is going to dramatically increase. And I think it's fair to say in agriculture, so to the biology point that I was making a minute ago, you still have to take the seed and put it in the ground and grow it. You can't cook a turkey at 10,000 degrees in 3 minutes.
Yep.
You just can't, and you can't do it with the crop either. You have to let the thing grow. It has to go outside, or most often outside, and that takes time. So the experimental cycles in agriculture take time, and so in a respect that I think might even be much more significant than other industries that have more rapid cycling or simpler biological systems, in agriculture we're almost more dependent. Yeah, I would say more dependent long term, getting predictive outcomes from an analytics platform. In other words, getting it right the first time, because even though I might have gone from 20 years or 18 years down to say 6 years, people will say, well, you've only cut it by 67%. All these other industries have cut everything by 99%. Well, you can't cook a turkey at 10,000 degrees in 3 minutes. So there are some rate limiters here, and a degree of patience that's required in this space that is often not required in other industries that we like to compare ourselves to. And while I think that a lot of those similarities do indeed exist, biology is biology, and it's still messy, and it's going to be messy for a long time. But anyway, I think I just want to make sure that the point is, these technologies are exponential in many respects, but it comes with the caveat that there is a biological rate limiter, and until we figure out how to grow a corn crop in 6 days, that this is going to operate within the context of the existing infrastructure.
Well, Matt, I want to thank you for your time here. We, from an iSelect perspective, we see a lot of interesting innovation going on. We're located right here in St. Louis. You're right outside the Danforth Center, which is a premier research center, and you have all the exciting people from Monsanto looking at what you're doing and seeing what the next generation's going to be.
We had to get tinted windows put up because
to have them stop looking.
Just kidding.
But I'd like to have you back sometime in the future, because I have a sense that there's a lot that's going to happen in the next 18 months, both with you and with some of these other companies. So thank you very much, and be prepared to come back and tell us more.
Would love to. Thanks for the opportunity, and appreciate iSelect support.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Innovation Anarchy. To subscribe, go to iTunes, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts. Stay tuned for more conversations about venture, innovation, and entrepreneurship.